Hey, gang, got a new interview for you today with Dr. Russell Ryder. Dr. Ryder is a professor of cell biology with 4 honorary MD degrees and one honorary Doctor of Sciences degree from international universities. His lifelong research is on melatonin. His papers have been cited more than 173,000 times in medical literature and scientific literature. He's the co-editor of Melatonin Research and the founder and past editor of the Journal of Pineal Research. So, Dr. Russell Ryder is one of the world's foremost experts on melatonin. He might be the number one guy. As far as I can tell, he's the number one guy. So, Dr. Ryder, thanks for taking the time to talk with me about melatonin.
My pleasure, obviously. I've been doing it a long time, so I'm interested.
Well, I've seen several of your lectures, and I've learned so much from you. And I think there's so much about melatonin that people do not know, and even many doctors and scientists do not know, and things that I imagine you have discovered in your career. And so I will get to those things, but I'd love to start with your backstory. How did you get into melatonin research?
Well, if you really want to hear it, it is an interesting story.
I do.
Melatonin was discovered in 1958 by Dr. Aaron Lerner, a dermatologist. Of course, that's the year I graduated from the university. And during my early career as a graduate student, one of the fellow students gave a lecture on melatonin. It had just been discovered. I recall leaving the lecture and say, that is a subject on which I will never work. Well, 2 years later, while in the military, there was an emphasis on long distance space travel because of the Sputnik that had been launched in 1957. Already the US was thinking in 1964, when I was a captain in the Medical Service Corps, that we will be going to Mars. And the Mars trip they knew would take 6 months. And they said they were visualizing a small 3-man capsule. They said, these astronauts are going to go stir crazy in that small capsule. So we have to get something to make them hibernate. So they charged 3 of us, researchers, with isolating the factor that caused hibernation. And that led us to melatonin. Not that melatonin is a hibernating factor, but it has something to do with hibernation. So that's really the stimulus. It was the U.S. space program and my military experience, 2 years in the Medical Service Corps, that led to my interest in melatonin.
So obviously, this was very early in melatonin discovery and research. So you were right on the forefront of this. And so what were some of the things that you learned initially about melatonin?
Well, the most obvious thing that it does is it's only produced in the pineal gland at night. In other words, all vertebrate species, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals have a pineal gland, and it produces melatonin at night, and it's released into the circulation. And this provides a signal of time of day. It's a circadian rhythm regulator. But additionally, it's more than that. You have to recall that we evolved from species that were maintained under natural habitats where day length changes as a function of season. In other words, long day lengths in the summer, short day lengths in the winter, and that changes the duration of elevated melatonin at night, the shorter the night. So melatonin is both a clock, providing circadian information, and it is a calendar. It supplies time of day information. And that's one of the first things we captured on seasonal reproduction in animals that is determined by light and dark and, of course, melatonin.
So you talk about the fact that melatonin, and this is what I thought for years, melatonin is produced by the pineal gland at night, but does melatonin actually make you sleepy?
Well, certainly it's widely used as a sleep promoting agent, but it's not considered a soporific. It doesn't work like other sleep promoting agents. Rather, it's a circadian rhythm effect. The way they describe the effects on sleep is it opens a normal sleep gate, allows for normal sleep to occur, which means for melatonin to promote sleep, it has to be taken at the right circadian time. People who take melatonin for sleep, really it's only effective in 65, 70% of the individuals. And this may relate to the fact that they are not taken at the precise time to allow opening of the sleep gate. So they should adjust that time somewhat so that also, if you're going to take it for sleep, certainly, and this is not easy for humans to do, take it at the same time every night. We should have better sleep hygiene where we go to sleep the same time every night and take melatonin. But of course, people are confounded with weekends where things typically change in the evenings.
One of the things that I learned when I was writing my first book about melatonin was that there have been probably multiple studies of this nature, but they took humans out into the woods and they had them, they kept them out in the woods away from artificial light for several days, and they measured their melatonin. And what they found is that when they were not to artificial light at night, they got sleepy earlier. Where the sun went down, as soon as it was dark, they would get sleepy several hours earlier than normal, and their melatonin levels would be higher because they were sleeping longer at night. And so this reinforces this idea that we should be sleeping in darkness and we should not be exposed to blue light at night or before bed. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely true. Certainly, the duration of when it gets dark, normally melatonin levels would rise. The bottom line is humans are living in a very artificial environment. Every individual I know, when it gets dark in the evening, doesn't immediately go to bed. They maintain under light until they do go to bed, which means they are delaying the onset of their melatonin rhythm. And that is truly abnormal in this situation. We were not designed to handle that. Light was never an option during our evolution at night. Regarding blue light, blue wavelengths of light are clearly the most inhibitory to melatonin production. But of course, most white lights that you have in your office or in your home contain blue wavelengths. So it may appear white or yellowish, but in fact, there's a lot of blue wavelengths in there, and that inhibits your melatonin. So if you're going to avoid any light in the evening or at night, you should avoid blue light. And that brings up a very important point. I'm sure your people know this, your listeners know this, that turning on a light at night is never a good idea because it sets your circadian clock, it suppresses your melatonin, and you can actually experience a type of jet lag, fatigue as a consequence. Light should be avoided after you go to bed at night until you get up in the morning.
So getting up in the middle of the night, don't turn on a light. Because what happens? It sends a signal to your body that it's daytime and the melatonin production is sort of blunted or stopped.
Absolutely stopped. What happens is your retinas have a specialized set of photoreceptors to regulate your circadian rhythm. In other words, if you turn on a light at night and you inhibit your melatonin, it has nothing to do with your rods and cones. Rods and cones are for vision. You're seeing me, I'm seeing you, that's vision. But there's a separate set of photoreceptors, very small number of what are called intrinsically photoreceptor retinal ganglion cells, which the neurons project to the biological clock. The biological clock is right behind your eyes on the base of the brain. It's called suprachiasmatic nucleus, and light at night disturbs that biological clock and inhibits melatonin production. And then the clock is confused, of course. It's been told for 4 million years of evolution that light is day, dark is night. And now come humans, we misuse that light dark environment badly.
Something else that I thought was interesting was that firelight and candlelight and even moonlight do not contain blue wavelengths. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely true. Exactly. You can be, for example, initially I was often asked, how about moonlight? Moonlight, I grew up in Minnesota where during the winter there was a lot of snow. On a bright moonlit night, reflecting off the snow, it was really very bright.
Yeah.
But it's not blue wavelengths of light. The bottom line is you can have light at night, but it should not contain any blue wavelengths. And this brings up something very important. For example, people with newborn infants, they awaken at night and people will get up and turn on the light. That really should be avoided. Also, if you nurse, you should do it at night in darkness or in subdued light, but not blue light or white light, but subdued yellow light, red light. That indicates that night lights, which a lot of people have, and are not necessarily bad, but they are bad if they contain blue wavelengths or bright white. They should be some other color.
And I imagine a lot of nursing mothers will get on their phone while they're nursing, or they'll watch a little TV in the middle of the night, and that is producing blue light, which is messing them up and probably interfering with the baby's melatonin as well.
Well, yeah, that's another very important point. The newborn infants' pineal gland, they have a pineal gland, and also during pregnancy, I want to emphasize this. During pregnancy, the developing fetus receives melatonin signal from the mother, which passes through the placenta to the fetus and helps set the biological clock of the fetus. So if the pregnant woman has light at night, it's always also giving misinformation to the fetus and the development of its biological clock. And we now know that has consequences. Those studies have not been done in humans, but we know in animals that impacts development of the circadian rhythms in the newborns. Also, for the first 6 months roughly after birth, the newborn infant pineal gland does not produce melatonin, and as a consequence, it gets melatonin from the nursing mother via the milk. The issue now is, of course, that many mothers no longer nurse, but they have artificial means, and those artificial substitutes do not contain melatonin. I've actually been asked by one of those companies one time, should we have a melatonin artificial substitute for night and one for day? And I think that would be a very good idea, but to my knowledge, nobody has yet instituted that.
You're blowing my mind right now. That's incredible. I had never thought about the impact of light at night or reduced melatonin on the developing fetus, and it makes so much sense. And I also did not know that a newborn baby does not produce melatonin, and they're getting it through mother's milk. This is really important information. And what did you say for the first 3 or 4 months of life? Is that what?
Yeah, well, up to 6 months, but certainly within the first 3 or 4 months. There's even a theory, and I do not subscribe to this. When the melatonin rhythm develops 4, 5, 6 months, this is a time of occurrence of sudden infant death syndrome. And some people have speculated that the maldevelopment of the melatonin rhythm due to exposure to light at the wrong time may be consequential in terms of causing sudden infant death. Like I say, I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but the point is that people should be much more attentive, particularly during pregnancy or during nursing periods, to their light-dark environment. All people should be more attentive, but especially those individuals.
and just more evidence to throw on the pile that mother's milk is the perfect food for a newborn baby. There's nothing compares to mother's milk. It really is perfect.
You're absolutely right.
That's incredible. Okay, before we go too much farther here, let me back up because we haven't really talked about all of the benefits of melatonin in the human body, right? What is it doing to the human body? Because, and I want to touch on this, but I would love for you to expound on it. But it is one of the most powerful anti-cancer hormones in the body, and it's also an antioxidant, correct?
Absolutely. Its anti-cancer effects go back a very long time. Within 10 years after the discovery of melatonin in 1968, Vera Lepkin, a scientist in Europe, described the inhibitory effects of melatonin on cancer cells. A very crude experiment because at the time there were not a lot of sophisticated methodologies, but that observation has been exploited in hundreds, thousands of publications since then. Melatonin is a reasonable agent to consider when it comes to cancer. Most cancers are age-related. As you age, your ability to produce melatonin wanes. Many diseases are age-related, and many seem to be related to the reduction of melatonin, because if you substitute melatonin, it can delay, defer, forestall many of these conditions, including presumably cancer. I think people who routinely take melatonin for sleep, for example, don't realize that they are getting other benefits as well, likely as an anti-cancer agent, and certainly as an antioxidant. It is very powerful antioxidant, much better, for example, than vitamin E or vitamin C. I'm not disparaging those antioxidants, but relative to melatonin, they are second class.
So I've seen studies and research that you're alluding to here that melatonin suppresses tumor growth, suppresses cancer growth. And obviously that becomes very important for someone who wants to prevent cancer, or someone who has active cancer. It becomes very important that they get really, really good quality regenerative sleep, that at night their body is producing as much melatonin as possible before we get into the supplementation conversation, right? So maximizing melatonin production naturally is definitely a good thing, which means going to bed earlier, sleeping in total darkness, not interfering with your sleep with blue light. And, putting those things into practice makes a lot of sense. Now, melatonin also, it's part of your body's repair and regenerative processes, right? Because when you sleep, that's when your body is repairing, right? That's when you're resting, you're regenerating, you're repairing. And so with low levels of melatonin, your body is not able to adequately repair and regenerate and perhaps suppress tumor growth, which leads us to this other little talked about problem. I actually talk about it in my book, but which is that there's a number of pharmaceutical drugs that suppress melatonin production, right?
Indeed, there are. Of course, many people who are hypertensive are on something called beta blockers. Beta blockers are very good to treat hypertension. However, they also impede melatonin production because the mechanism by which the nervous system enhances melatonin synthesis in the pineal gland is via beta adrenergic receptors, and those receptors are blocked by these drugs. Quite frankly, most drugs have not been tested relative to specifically inhibiting melatonin, but surely a number of them do. I also want to go back to your point about cancer and misuse of light at night. It is well known that individuals who work night shift, for example, or do frequent transmeridian travel where they're in jet lag all the time, have an increased cancer risk. Indeed, pharmaceutical agents, some, we don't know how many because they've not been tested, impact our ability to produce melatonin for sure.
There are hundreds of documented pharmaceuticals, but as you said, there may be many more. I found a quote short list of several hundred when I was researching for my book that were known to suppress melatonin, and it was kind of a big epiphany for me. The light bulb, like, oh no, right? Not only are our daily lifestyle habits, our daily routines, our nighttime habits reducing our body's production of melatonin, but then many of us are taking pharmaceuticals, or if you're in cancer treatment, you're definitely taking pharmaceuticals, and then that's suppressing it even further. And if this hormone is as powerful as we think it is in regards to healing and suppressing cancer growth, then we should be doing a lot more to make sure that patients and just regular people are optimizing their melatonin, right?
Absolutely. That would be a reasonable thing to do. And of course, all individuals who work on melatonin are very familiar with this idea, and individuals like you and those who take it for sleep also. But melatonin, in my opinion, should be more widely used because of the misuse of light, and especially during aging. There's just so much experimental evidence that would suggest that we could reduce the untoward health effects that we experience with aging by supplementing with melatonin. This is one example. I'm 85 years old. I've been taking melatonin for 28 years. Knock on wood, I'm in still very good health, but there's a lot of my colleagues who have worked on melatonin who do the very same thing and are doing very well. I would say that's not a controlled study, but animal studies unequivocally show that deferring age-related diseases is possible with melatonin. Not only cancer, neurodegenerative diseases. I'm just writing a paper now on Alzheimer's and melatonin. And that's a very, very debilitating condition.
So I think a lot of people will be surprised to know you've been taking melatonin 28 years, you said, and
Right.
You take melatonin during the day, correct?
Well, that's not exactly accurate. I always take it at night.
Okay.
Before bedtime, because that's the time melatonin would normally be increasing. I have taken melatonin during the day, and there's justification for that. Again, this isn't a recommendation necessarily, but we know that the cancer cell metabolism is different at night than during the day. It has a better positive metabolism at night that's directly related to the availability of melatonin. So cancer cells, in some regards, are more cancerous during the day than they are at night. And they are less cancerous at night because they are exposed to melatonin, which changes their metabolism, called the Warburg effect. So in some cancer cases, it may be worthwhile to take melatonin during the day. And not only in cancer, but maybe in some severe septic conditions. We've treated newborn infants, neonates, with melatonin during the day to improve them in terms of their septic response. Sepsis is a very deadly condition throughout the world in adults and in children. So when you are severely ill, taking melatonin during the day and at night is not unreasonable.
There's several questions people are going to ask and they want me to ask. So, does taking melatonin reduce your body's ability to produce melatonin?
That's a very good question, and it's typical endocrine question. Endocrinologists realize that taking hormones have feedback effects that impact the original hormone. Melatonin in the pineal gland is controlled by the nervous system and not by endocrine feedback. So If you supplement with melatonin, if you take melatonin, you do not. There's no evidence that you impede the normal cyclic production of melatonin whatsoever. You may shift it slightly in terms of its rhythm. The melatonin rhythm is not precisely 24 hours. There's some flexibility in the system. For example, if a blinded individual who cannot perceive light, they cannot perceive light. If they can perceive light, they have a normal melatonin rhythm day and night. But if they cannot perceive light, the melatonin rhythm has a period that is the time from one peak to the next of 25 hours, close to 25 hours rather than 24 hours. And as a consequence, every day that peak moves an additional hour, and sometimes those profoundly blind individuals have high levels of melatonin during the day, and that is highly problematic. There's one other clinical situation where this is extremely unusual but occurs, Smith-Magenis syndrome, which is a genetic condition. They have permanently elevated melatonin during the day. In other words, the rhythm is just inverted. They have high levels of melatonin during the day and low at night. And that creates a lot of problems for those. And in addition to all the other genetic problems they have, the altered melatonin rhythm is also.
And what are the problems that they have from the high peaks of melatonin in the day for a blind
they're
person?
obviously very sleepy all the time during the day and awake most of the night, wandering around. But it's now treatable. I told you there are drugs that will inhibit melatonin. So if they are given those drugs that inhibit melatonin during the day and they substitute melatonin at night, they can simulate a normal day and night rhythm so that it is a treatable condition. It doesn't rectify their genetic problems, obviously, but it does resolve the issue of this faulty circadian melatonin cycle.
There's also been studies on blind people having lower rates of cancer.
Yes, absolutely.
Certain types of cancer. And there has been a correlation there drawn between their high circulating levels of melatonin, right, and low rates of cancer. There could be other factors, but that's one that seems fairly obvious as a potential contributor of benefit.
Yeah. In reference to aging, I want to mention one other thing. There have been very nice studies by a gentleman by the name of Schultens, who showed that typically melatonin levels wane as we age, and we think that's detrimental to or encourages aging processes. What they found is that if you take 75-year-olds and classify them as being in good health for their age or frail health, those in good health always have a much better preserved melatonin rhythm. The implication is that maybe they are in better health because they have a better preserved melatonin rhythm, but that's not the only conclusion. They may have a better melatonin health rhythm because they have preserved health. But from animal studies, it is clear that if you maintain melatonin levels, you can defer some of the, I'm hopeful. Obviously, that's what I'm doing. That doesn't mean it'll work, or whether it's working. I may just be fortunate genetically that at 85, I'm still active and doing things. But I feel that melatonin is certainly not hurting me. Certainly not hurting me.
Well, okay, a couple of questions related to that. One is, how much melatonin do you take at night? And has that changed over the years?
For sure. I started with the conventional dose, and typically for sleep, it's 3 to 5 milligrams, which is excellent, fine. There's no reason if as a young person to take more than that, unless you have justification in terms of serious disease. But to defer aging, the evidence is that you will say, let's take a specific example. Say you're 25, you're not sleeping well, you take 3 to 5 milligrams. And then your endogenous levels of melatonin wane gradually over age. Maybe by the time you're 45, you're taking 10 milligrams and so forth, escalate thereafter. I'm a little reluctant to tell you how much melatonin I take because it's not a recommendation. Right now, I'm taking about 100 milligrams nightly, but for a very specific reason. Melatonin is very also antiviral. So I'm trying to impede the likelihood that I will come down with COVID, and I have not had any COVID. Again, that's doesn't mean melatonin protected me from, but I'm doing what I can to ensure. In other words, if it wasn't for COVID, I'd probably be taking less. But
and what would your less dose be if you weren't taking COVID? I mean, if it wasn't,
maybe 30 to 50 milligrams in that for my age adjusted, younger individuals, you know. But again, if you have there are now a number of clinical trials. I don't know if you want to discuss COVID and melatonin, but there are a number of clinical trials on melatonin and COVID. There's actually 6 clinical trials. And in every case, they have been found to reduce either the severity of the infection, duration of hospitalization, the necessity for tracheal intubation, which is really very, very tough, and it has decreased mortality. Now, mortality is a pretty important endpoint. So if you can reduce the likelihood of dying by taking a little supplemental melatonin if you have COVID, I think that's money well spent. And money, when it comes to melatonin, is hardly an issue. It's cheaper than aspirin. And that brings up something else. Remdesivir, and there are some drugs, FDA-approved drugs for COVID infections. Remdesivir treatment for a week costs around $3,000. You can do the same thing with melatonin for less
$30.
than
$5.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean I'm telling all your listeners, go out and use melatonin for treatment exclusively. I mean, I want them to follow the physician's orders, but they really should think seriously about melatonin in terms of many advantages it has.
Well, melatonin's gotten a lot of traction thanks to COVID because there are a number of frontline doctors and organizations now that are recommending it for prevention and early treatment and even late treatment, along with vitamin C, vitamin D, quercetin, zinc, melatonin. Those are really sort of like the top 5 that are recommended in conjunction, all obviously over-the-counter supplements. And I've been talking about those supplements for many, many years because they're known to be good for your immune system, and they're known to have also anti-cancer benefits in the body, and yes, antiviral, because anything that's supporting your immune system, you have the same immune system that has to fight a virus that has to identify and eliminate cancer cells, right? It's the same army. So you want to support your immune health as much as possible and make sure it's optimized, it's functioning at the best possible level it can. Okay, so something else you said I'd love to just highlight, which is the research you mentioned where older folks have lower melatonin. And I just wanted to point out that another correlation there is that older folks also tend to take more prescription medications.
Yeah.
So there's another factor there too, right? As we age, we just tend to, aches and pains, problems, right? Chronic diseases start to manifest, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 medications are, all of a sudden circulating in your system. So that, again, that kind of plays into the vicious cycle, of aging and chronic disease and melatonin reduction and, poor lifestyle choices too. And doesn't alcohol also affect melatonin?
Alcohol in excess in the evening, coffee in excess in the evening, there are a number of things that impede melatonin production, particularly if they're taken late in the day, early in the evening. Modest amounts, it appears to have minimal effect, but overdoing it, not surprisingly, has some impact on the. I did want to, if you don't mind, mention one other thing in reference to the way society is now functioning. Women are delaying childbearing later in their reproductive life, and this is associated with a number of adverse outcomes, spina bifida and so forth. And it seems to relate also to the loss of melatonin, as does the development of menopause. In other words, we know in animals, if you give melatonin to female animals in their late reproductive state, you can improve their reproducibility and delay ovarian aging. And ovarian aging is a very important aspect of successful reproduction. It protects the oocytes from oxidative damage, and an oocyte that is damaged will either not implant, cause a miscarriage, and if it does implant, it will have consequences in terms of an unusual offspring. So there's strong evidence that women in their late reproductive periods, if they want to bear children, should consider also melatonin to protect their ovaries and especially the oocytes, and also implantation. Implantation is a phenomenon that is very important for successful development of the fetus. So there's just a lot of worthy things to consider when it comes to melatonin. It never, that's a tough word to justify, but there's very, very, very little evidence that melatonin ever has any significant adverse effects. It just is a wholesome molecule that does special things. Your point about the immune system is valid. You want your immune system geared up as best you can, and melatonin is a very good. And we think that's one reason it is so combative against COVID-19. The other thing is it's antiviral generally by virtue of its ability to upregulate the immune system. Even the common cold, which is, of course, viral, we think would be impacted by melatonin. The drugs used to treat COVID treat the virus. Melatonin treats the individual to upregulate the immune system, making that individual resistant to a variety of viruses. There's now studies on the Zika virus. There's a paper in press on the Zika, Simliki-4 virus. We even propose its use in Ebola. Ebola is a viral too. And I think, melatonin, we have no definitive evidence that it will work, but every bit of experimental data suggests it is worthy of consideration. Even the World Health Organization during the bottom line is, in the case of Ebola, the World Health Organization made a very important statement, namely that any reasonable treatment that has no or minimal side effects should be used to prevent death of these. In other words, it's maybe unethical not to use melatonin in these cases. Unethical, because by virtue of the fact that it probably would be beneficial and it has no side effects. We can't always wait for a vaccine to be developed. If there's another new virus that develops, we can't wait. I mean, we can wait 6, 9, 12 months, but thousands of people die in that interval. So, you have to have other options.
Yeah, if you wait and do nothing, people are going to die. And unfortunately, we saw that in 2020 where doctors were just told there are no treatments, and they harassed and demonized and marginalized for using the drugs they had at their disposal, for using recommending the supplements like we talked about, then also using off-label drugs that they had, right, to save lives. And many of my, sort of my newer favorite hero doctors are the ones that stood up to the CDC mandates saying there's no approved drugs and said, well, we're going to use what we've got. We're going to treat inflammation. We're going to treat blood clotting. We're going to treat lung damage, steroids, stuff like that. So anyway, let me ask you about this. Blue blocker glasses. I know you're aware of this. I know there's research about it. What is your opinion? Do you think the research is compelling that blue blocking glasses at night are actually helpful?
Well, there's I think one or two clinical studies suggesting that one of the difficulties with blue blocking glasses is they typically are not tight. They are not wraparound. So there's a lot of light that enters the eyes or the visual system that still contains blue wavelengths of light. Optimally, if you're going to wear blue blockers, they should be like goggles. They may be uncomfortable, but if you want to resort to that, I think it's feasible. Certainly avoiding blue light in the evening by any means would be beneficial, and therefore blue blocking glasses would be something to use. One of the companies that produces these goggles sent me a pair, and I tried them, but again, light coming from the sides impacts. And of course, I'm not accustomed to wearing heavy goggles at night, so I don't wear them because I take melatonin anyway. But if people want to do that, I would not discourage you from doing so.
Did they send you the goggle style glasses?
No, these are the ones I have are not the goggle style.
Okay.
They are very similar to what I have on now.
I've worn a pair for many years, and they're not the goggles. They're just regular type glasses. And yeah, I definitely have seen, read some of the same things that you've read, and it does make sense that the goggles are probably more effective. And, I'm not sure if the kind that I use are helping me or not. It's hard for me to know for sure, but, I put them on. If we watch little TV at night, I just put them on and hope they're being helpful.
In reference to this, I mean, people have to realize that light is not light is not light. Light is different from different sources. Even this has become a big issue in terms of space travel or astronauts. They are in a very abnormal light dark environment, and they in fact manipulate the wavelengths of light according to time of day. Early morning, blue light, of course, will inhibit your melatonin and make you more alert. At night, in the evening, you don't want a blue light. So they adjust the wavelengths of light on these space flights with the intent of helping. The bottom line is light is a drug. People have to realize this. Light is a drug that impacts our physiology via melatonin and via the circadian clock. Circadian rhythms are very important for optimal health.
Well, you think about the casinos and how brightly lit the casinos are, right? Brightly lit. They want to keep you awake all night.
They want to keep you in there. And they have no windows. They don't want you to know it's dark. They don't want you to know it's night.
Yeah, and I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, this may be completely false, but I've also heard that, they pump in oxygen too, Oh,
that may be.
So I don't know. Well, at night, to keep people awake. But
oxygen, you understand, is very deadly, because the free radicals are derived from oxygen. Hyperbaric oxygen, too much oxygen. It's ironic. Oxygen, you need it to live, but during the course of a lifetime, it gradually kills you.
From oxidative stress?
Exactly.
Oxidizing. I mean, oxidizing is what corrodes and breaks down lots of things like plastic and metal and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
The rust on your car.
Yeah, that is right. Oxygen. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the sunshine and melatonin, because you really blew my mind when I heard you speaking about the effect that infrared light from the sun has on melatonin in the body. Will you talk about that?
Wow, you are really up to date. This is this really, I have to give Scott Zimmerman, who's a lighting engineer expert, credit for this as well. We did publish a paper jointly about infrared light. The reason infrared is so important is because it has high penetrability. It goes through the skin and into the subdermis, and it impacts cells directly. I want to give you some more information, but I don't want to confuse your audience. Melatonin is no longer exclusively produced in the pineal gland. It's produced in the pineal gland, and it's produced in a circadian manner and released into the blood. Melatonin is also produced in other cells, but it's never released into the blood. In other words, if I remove your pineal gland, which I'm not going to do,
Good.
Good. But your blood levels of melatonin will be negligible, albeit you will have other cells that are still producing melatonin. So those other cells do not produce melatonin. And it appears that the infrared light that penetrates the skin and some of the subdermis and even quite deep into the body has impacts on melatonin synthesis in these organs. I think that's a very up and coming field, the impact of infrared radiation in terms of health and, of course, effects via melatonin. Like I say, there's very little information. But the paper you mentioned really caught on with a number of physicians also. I've gotten a number of calls about the infrared radiation and melatonin production and its importance for the skin. It's not yet a landslide of interest, but individuals like you and other colleagues have picked up on this, and they say, we have to be attentive to all wavelengths, not only the visible wavelengths. Other wavelengths also have X-rays that's how they work. They have very high penetrability.
So the implications of this research, and I imagine there's more to do, is that infrared light from the sun and possibly from other sources, it triggers the production of melatonin inside cells in your body. And the melatonin in your cells has the same benefits as the melatonin in your bloodstream. It's antioxidant, it's anti-cancer, right? It's good it assists in repair and regeneration. And so this also is lending more credibility to the sun and how good the sun is for us. Everybody thinks about, sunshine and vitamin D, right? And other people are afraid of the sun because they think, the sun causes skin cancer. Like, hell, don't let me get any sun on me. But I believe this was articulated by you. And to me, I found it so fascinating and brilliant because in the early morning hours, we're really we're getting mostly infrared light from the sun.
Right.
And then as the sun rises, it's in midday, we're getting a lot of ultraviolet light. And the ultraviolet light does produce vitamin D, but too much of it obviously causes skin damage. And so, we don't want to harm your skin. But then in the later afternoon, that shifts back to more infrared light. And so it's almost like it seems to me that the early morning sun, if we were living like our ancestors, working out of doors, right, being outside, that infrared light in the morning was producing melatonin in our cells, producing some protection from the midday UV damage. And then in the later afternoon hours, the infrared light from the sun is producing more melatonin in our cells to help repair and mitigate whatever damage, happened in midday, right?
Well, absolutely right. Like I say, you're far ahead of 99% of the people because you continually examine and think about these things.
That's because I've been listening to you.
You mentioned a brilliant statement. If I made the statement, it probably wasn't brilliant.
I disagree, but I've been listening to you and following Doris Lowe, who I know is a colleague of yours.
Yes, she is brilliant. This young lady is young. I don't know how old she is, but she is brilliant. She really has her act together, and I admire her. Yeah, we have been collaborating extensively the last couple of years.
So, yeah, it just got that research got me really, really excited about melatonin. I mean, that's a cool thing about science. It's never settled. We thought that melatonin was only produced in the body at night, right? And now we're learning that, wait a second, oh, it's also produced during the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. I love learning new things about
and a little
body.
bit of other information. We just had a publication come out yesterday. It was not preliminary, it was better than preliminary, but it wasn't a complete study, where we found that cancer cells, when they are cancerous, are producing less melatonin than normal cells. And melatonin is an anti-cancer agent. We think that will become highly relevant. And we understand why they would produce less melatonin. It's a very complex metabolic thing, again, involving that Warburg effect that I mentioned before. We have some idea how that may be happening, but it appears generally that cancer cells are deficient in their ability to protect themselves with melatonin, which, again, cancer cells are very clever. They do a lot of things to enhance themselves in terms of growth and metastasis. In reference to that, I want to say that I think one of the biggest benefits of melatonin and cancer is to reduce the likelihood of metastasis. Cancer is never good, but it's often the primary cancer doesn't kill you. It's the metastatic cancer that is the worst. So if we can prevent metastasis, growth taking up residence somewhere else, that would be a very big thing. And melatonin has actions that suggest it would be very anti-metastatic. So again, if I would never discourage any cancer patients, even after treatment, from taking melatonin. I mean, you always have some cancer stem cells that hang around and can refurbish themselves and regenerate into some viable cancer cells. So, and you want to prevent that, and melatonin won't do any harm.
That's really good to know. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Is it possible that the reduction in production of melatonin within cancer cells, if that was reversed, or if melatonin production was elevated or triggered or whatever, that maybe that would contribute to apoptosis, to programmed cancer cell death, that maybe that downregulation of melatonin is their way of staying alive. And if they had sufficient levels, they would revert back to normal cells in a sense and die.
Well, I think if you can restore melatonin levels in cancer cells, that may be one of the means by which supplemental melatonin, in fact, reduces the likelihood of cancer. Melatonin is absorbed by the cell, it's absorbed into the mitochondria, so it would increase the melatonin. And there was another paper published yesterday by a very brilliant group in Sao Paulo, Brazil, led by Regina Marcus, where she showed that melatonin supplementation actually stimulates melatonin synthesis she didn't study cancer cells. She studied certain brain cells called glia, and she showed that supplemental melatonin stimulates melatonin synthesis. If it does this also in cancer cells, that could be a mechanism by which it suppresses, delays, defers, forestalls, whatever term you want to use. I hate to use the word totally prevent, because that's, again, to prevent totally cancer is tough, but you should take the necessary precautions that are available if they're safe. And certainly melatonin is inexpensive. Why not?
Okay. Another question that I'm thinking about here is, and I know this is very early research and there's a lot more to be done, but is it possible that infrared light from devices, let's say an infrared sauna,
Right.
would also trigger the production of melatonin in humans? I don't think this has been studied yet.
It's reasonable if infrared light, the cell does not recognize from where the infrared light derives. So to it only knows it responds to that wavelength. So so you're right. One would expect that. And that would be a reasonable thing to do in culture with cells. Just put cells in culture, expose the infrared, and measure their ability to produce melatonin. As you say, we need a lot more information because every day there are new discoveries. Infrared light, for example, is relatively new. So all the studies have not been done.
Sounds like you need to
will never be done. I can recall I was so naive when I entered graduate school because my mentor said you have to do some original research for your PhD work. And I said, my gosh, everything is known.
Yeah.
You talk about naive.
Little did you know how much was unknown.
Exactly.
Well, we just got a original research idea for some of your colleagues right there.
Absolutely.
UV light on cells. Do they produce melatonin in the lab?
Exactly.
I'd love to know. Personally, there's yeah. Well, is there anything else? Because we're rolling out here, maybe just a couple minutes, and I want to be respectful of your time. But is there any other melatonin research or facts or information that you're particularly excited about, or you think people need to know that we haven't covered?
Well, certainly the evidence, for example, in case of ischemia reperfusion injury, stroke, heart attack. Every organ can experience ischemia reperfusion, interruption of blood supply. That, of course, kills tissue. In the brain and the heart, it's particularly bad because those cells do not regenerate or regenerate very poorly. And it is now known, you mentioned aspirin before. If you want to take aspirin, you should chew it. No, that was somebody else.
That wasn't me.
No, that was something else I saw. Because you wanted to get it in the system as fast as possible. Aspirin is an antioxidant, acidic acid, and that's why you take aspirin for a heart attack. I contend that, well, I've got a supply of melatonin with me all the time. If I have a heart attack or a stroke and I'm conscious, I will immediately load up on melatonin. Again, not necessarily a recommendation, but on the basis of what I know about the consequences of ischemia reperfusion, which is massive free radical generation, I will take all the melatonin I can as fast as I can.
Obviously, this is not medical advice, but for you personally, do you have a dose in mind for an emergency like that for you?
Well, in that case, I don't know if I would take not all the melatonin I have, but I would easily take 100 milligrams, and I may repeat it for several times over the next 24, 48 hours, because, like I say, the consequences of a stroke and a heart attack are usually severe, and you can't afford to lose those important tissues. If you damage your liver can regenerate pretty well. But you damage your heart, those cardiomyocytes are lost. And then, of course, what happens is you develop fibrous tissue and you develop heart failure and all the associated processes associated with it. So, again, I do want to leave your listeners with the idea that melatonin is not magical. It's not It's just a good, wholesome molecule that evolved with the intent of helping cells to function at a maximal level, optimal level. And again, if they want to take it, the likelihood of doing harm is minimal and greatly outweigh the benefits, greatly outweigh the potential downside, Chris.
There's some medical research opinions on melatonin for cancer patients and the optimal dose, and I've seen recommendations as high as 120, 150 milligrams per day. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any? I don't know how close attention you're paying to, patient doses, and most of this is not, coming from oncologists. It's some integrative oncologists and other folks. Any thoughts?
A very good question. First of all, of course, the number of types of cancer are numerous. So each one may require, or the best dose may vary according to type of cancer. It may depend on other comorbidities. It may depend on the age of the patient and so forth and so on. But again, you can't overdose.
You cannot.
You cannot. I'll give you an example. Every drug has what is called an
LD50.
A lethal dose for 50% of the animals, not humans. You cannot do an LD50 for melatonin. You cannot kill an animal.
Really?
You give all the melatonin you have, and the animal looks at it and says, "Is that the best you got?" So, I don't know. The optimal dose is very difficult to decide upon because the double-blind studies have not been done. But again, I told you I take melatonin for many reasons, not the least of which I may still get cancer. There's no guarantees in life, but I'm doing what I can to discourage those cells from transforming.
Yes, but at 85, you've already outlived the average American man by about 7 years.
Yeah.
So you're doing great.
And I plan to work for another 10.
And you've got all your wits about you, and so you're not rolling around in a wheelchair. It's fantastic.
No,
I think it's great.
Chris,
thank you for your insight. Thank you so much for your insight. This has been such a thrill for me. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of you and your work and your research, and I've learned so much from you, and it's so important. And I'm really excited to share this. And it's very encouraging to know that there's no known lethal dose of melatonin. People don't have to be afraid or worried about taking it or even taking more than maybe the bottle says, but everybody's got to make their own decisions there. But yeah, that's very encouraging that let me just ask you one little bit about that. Are there any side effects that would indicate maybe an overdose?
Yeah, that's reasonable. The side effects that have typically been described are subjective. Well, I'm more sleepy. I'm dizzy. But those are subjective. It's very hard to quantify. Most people are sleepy because they don't get enough sleep. So but there may be some unique situations. To say melatonin has never adverse effects may be wrong. There may be some unique metabolic situations in some individuals at some time wherein melatonin would not be recommended.
Sure.
I'll give you one example. There was one case report last year where a person who was taking, it's a case report, one person, where a person got severe diarrhea after taking melatonin, got off the melatonin, never had diarrhea. About 15 years ago, there was one case, again, one patient, a male, who developed gynecomastia, breasts, as a consequence of taking melatonin. So there are some unique circumstances where melatonin may be ill-advised, but compared to I'll give you another example people don't realize. About 3,000 people die annually from aspirin toxicity throughout the world. Another 20,000 develop gastric ulcers. People take aspirin like it's candy and never worry about any side effects. And melatonin has never, so far as we know, killed anyone or caused anything equivalent to gastric ulcers. So it's all relative. It's how you perceive the effects.
That's great perspective. Thank you, Dr. Russell Ryder. Again, I'm so proud to get to know you and thrilled to interview you. This has been really fun. And where can people find you? Where can they find out about your research? Is there places they can follow you on the internet? I don't know how involved you are in social media and things like that, but
I'm not very involved at all in social media. But I don't know how many people have what is called PubMed NIH. All my publications are there. But again, that's all very technical stuff, which may be boring to a lot of people. But, you know.
Well, you do have some lectures on YouTube and some interviews, and I can link to some of those things.
That's a good point. There are a number of lectures on YouTube that I've given around the world.
Okay, we'll do that. Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you for watching. Please share this video with people you care about.
Be safe.
Bye, Dr. Ryder.
Bye.